Okay, hello, welcome to my podcast, UbD Podcast, Understanding by Design. Today we're going to start thinking about understanding by design a little bit more deeply. Today we explore a little bit about what is a big idea, what are our essential questions, what is our learning goal, right? And it was tricky and it is normal, but today we're gonna start trying to think about UBD as a glimpse right now, not as how you're gonna see it and you're gonna work with it with Betsy next semester in your curriculum class. Today we're gonna see it as a more simple thing, so we can start thinking about deeply about what lesson plans can we think to design, thinking about aesthetic learning experience and thinking about our assignment, right? So our assignment is asking us to think about an aesthetic curriculum, and the idea is that you provide all of these stages using the template, and the main focus is also at the end you should detail the description of 6 teaching and learning experiences that represent the learning plan, right? And you always have to make sure that the learning experiences in stage 3 are connecting to your curriculum goals, right? And you're gonna design this aesthetic curriculum thinking about what we have been learning this class. So I want you to think deeply about the template. So what are these stages? If we go to the template and we see that there are different things in the template. The first thing is the stage 1. That is the identify desired results, and the instruction says establish goals, content standards, course objectives, learning outcomes. And if you want to play with the standards, I told you that was fine, but also if you want to think about a specific learning outcome, you can also write down that. And we were practicing today, what were you thinking? What is your purpose? What do you want your students to go home with, right? So again, if we think about UBD, we were talking about not to be starting by planning what you'll teach. Instead, think about what you want your students to understand and be able to do by the end of the learning experience. So by the end of the unit in this case. Let's use an example. Imagine you're planning a unit about how art can tell community stories. And this is something very simple, right? Communities are very expressed by arts. So if you're a visual art teacher, maybe you're like fastly, and this is what I was saying today, is that you're gonna think about activity. So they're saying, oh, maybe they can do a community mural, or maybe they can do a performance based on stories from our own community. And even though this sounds fun and wonderful ideas, and you can absolutely do it in the last stage, we're gonna think first, what do I want students to understand by the end of this unit? So if I go to the template, we're thinking, so what do I want them to understand at the end? That is a learning outcome, right? Maybe it's not gonna be simple as paint a mural, do a performance, but it's gonna make them understand what is gonna make them understand how art can communicate stories, express identities, and strengthen communities. I want them to leave the room by knowing that art is able to do this, that art can communicate stories, that art can express identities, and that art can strengthen communities, okay? And it can be something more simple, as saying, for example, thinking about arts narrations of, or we can think about Colors, if you're like thinking about, for you it's very important your students to understand color. What is your outcome then? Why do you think it's important that they learn color, right? So once you have that ready, your outcome, you are gonna say the following. And this is what I like think about. Okay, so if I am thinking that for me it is important that students understand that art can communicate ideas, right? That is important that art represents communities, and that is important for them to know that that art can communicate messages. Maybe my goals are the following. Students will understand that arts can communicate ideas and tell stories. Students will understand that artists and theater makers can represent communities, and students will be able to create artworks that communicate meaningful messages, etc., or that represent communities, right? So then when I have my outcomes ready, I start thinking about what my students will keep thinking during this unit. They're gonna keep thinking about how can art tell stories of a community, whose stories are represented through the arts, how arts or how artists communicate messages, how can art bring communities together, etc., right? And then we're gonna think about knowledge. So knowledge, thinking about, again, we're thinking about culture, right? Community, we're thinking about stories. So what knowledge and skills will students need? If we go to the template, we can think about the following. So first of all, what understandings are desired, right? What I want my students to understand, and that's usually very similar to the outcome, okay? Big ideas, specific understandings, and then we go to the key knowledges, and then the key knowledge are our students will know. What are they gonna know? What concepts are they gonna know? So you're gonna understand that community art. Maybe I'm thinking about if you're doing performance, it can be like you want to introduce them theater of the oppressed, or if you're thinking about art, maybe I want them to learn about murals, because that's something that is related to community. So I want them to know about murals, and because I want them to know about murals, they're gonna understand, right, that many times murals are made for represented communities. That's one example. And then students will be able to is the abilities or skills, right? Maybe my students are gonna be able to identify how artists communicate ideas. Maybe they're gonna learn how to collaborate with each other and understand different ideas about arts. Just an example, right? So we're thinking about skills and abilities. And then in stage 2, we're thinking about what we're talking today, assessment. So how will I know students truly understand the outcome? How me as a teacher is going to be able to assess that the students are understanding the outcome, right? What evidence will convince me that they understand? For example, they could design a mural proposal based on stories about the grade that they are in, and they like interview people. I don't know. Maybe they're gonna create a short theater performance inspired by community stories. Maybe they're gonna write an artist statement or a director note, or maybe they're gonna present their artwork to classmates, or answer questions, or they're gonna do critical response protocol, or they're gonna do token response. So I'm thinking about aesthetic, because we always have to concentrate in aesthetic experiences. Our evidence also has to concentrate on that, right? So then for the planned learning experiences, and when we get to stage 3, we're gonna create 6 learning experiences that can relate to our stage 1 and stage 2. So what experiences will help students develop this understanding? So what we're talking about here is activities. What activities? What is happening really in the classroom, right? So maybe they're gonna do CRP in some murals and community theater performance from different cultures. Maybe they're gonna discuss what is the way in which artists communicate their ideas and identities, how they use symbolism. Or maybe they're gonna interview members of the communities and ask them for stories about the community, so then they can create a play, etc., etc., etc. So what lesson plans, what activities are they gonna do in the classroom? Okay, so this is mainly it. I know that today was a lot, and sometimes we can think about, and today we were mainly thinking about big ideas. What I want you now is to take this to the ground and start thinking about your outcome. So about in the template, for the first thing that you have to fill out for the established goal. What is your goal? What do you want your students to understand on this unit? Right? And I gave you an example just before. I was thinking about a big idea. I was thinking about how art can convey community messages and storytelling, right? And then I would say, okay, so what I want my students to really understand here in my example is the outcomes that I was saying, that they can understand that art can communicate stories, that my students will understand that artists and theaters represent communities. My students will understand that art creation can communicate meaningful messages about and stories about a community, etc., etc., right? So I hope that this makes a little bit more sense. If not, this podcast doesn't have to make a lot of sense. If it didn't work for you, we can always talk it out in class. We can always meet if you need a urgent meeting. But remember always that this is a glimpse. It's for you to practice and for you to create aesthetic curriculum. Okay, so yes, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm excited to see you tomorrow in class. On Wednesday. Bye bye.